Growing your own food is supposed to save money. Almost everybody agrees to that. It sounds logical. It gets repeated constantly. And it's one of the main reasons why people decide to start a garden in the first place. But after doing this for a very, very long time, I've learned that idea leaves out some, well, important details. Details that explain why so many people quit, and that why the ones who stick around approach food in a very different way. Today, I want to take an honest look at the myth of cheap homegrown food, why it rarely works the way people expected in the beginning, and how understanding that reality is actually what makes growing your own food sustainable in the long term. The belief that homegrown food is cheap didn't come from nowhere. On the surface, it makes perfect sense. Seeds cost a few dollars. Sunlight is free. Rain falls from the sky. And after all, food grows from the ground. Compared to grocery store prices, especially today, growing your own food feels like the obvious choice. Part of this belief also comes from comparing backyard gardens to grocery store prices. Look, commercial agriculture works on a scale most of us can't touch. They buy inputs by the truckload. They use specialized equipment and spread costs across thousands of acres. A backyard garden is doing something very different, and expecting it to compete on a price is an unfair comparison. So when people start gardening expecting to save money, they're not being foolish, they're just following a story that sounds reasonable. What that story usually skips over is everything that happens before the first harvest. Beds, containers, soil mixes, compost, fertilizer, seed starting stuff, irrigation, fencing, trellising. Even if you keep things simple, you're still investing before you grow anything. And tools are part of that cost too. Shovels, rakes, hoes, seeders, wheelbarrows, irrigation fittings, whatever. You don't need top-end stuff, but you do need functional tools. And most of us, well, don't buy them all at once. And most of us don't get it right the first time. We change methods, we rebuild things, we buy something that almost works, then replace it. It's not failure, that's just learning as you go. But it does mean the idea of cheap homegrown food starts to crack pretty quickly. Every garden pays tuition. Seeds don't germinate, transplants fail, the weather wipes out crops, pests and animals show up overnight. You plant the wrong variety at the wrong time and lose an entire row. These aren't rare events, they're normal. But when you're new, those losses feel expensive, not just in money, but in morale. Especially if you started with belief that gardening would immediately save you money. This is where a lot of people quietly step away and decide gardening isn't for them. There's another cost that almost never gets included in the conversation: time. Planning, planting, watering, weeding, harvesting, and preserving. Even a small garden requires a lot of attention. That time has value, whether you measure it in dollars or in trade-offs. If you don't enjoy the process, homegrown food will always feel expensive. And if you ignore the time cost completely, you'll never really understand what growing food asks of you. Here's where the story shifts. For people who stick with it, growing food doesn't become cheaper because of your inputs disappearing. It's because you become more efficient and make less mistakes. You stop buying a bunch of junk you don't need, you reuse what you've already purchased, and you learn what actually grows where you live. You stop chasing trends and start growing food that actually fits your life. What happens is your costs will stabilize, your waste drops, and your effort gets focused on where it needs to be. Not because gardening suddenly becomes cheap, but because it becomes intentional. If growing your own food was about saving money, most long-term growers would have quit years ago. The real value shows up elsewhere. You understand the seasons. You plan meals differently. You waste less. You're less dependent on last-minute Walmart runs. And there's a quiet confidence that comes from knowing your food doesn't magically appear on the shelves. That perspective changes how you see food, time, and effort, even if it never shows up on a receipt. Growing your own food usually isn't cheap in the way people expect, especially in the beginning. It costs money, time, and patience. But once you let go of the myth of cheap homegrown food, you can finally decide if it's worth it to you, on your terms, for your life. And that's when growing food stops being frustrating and starts being sustainable. From all of us here at Possum Ridge Farms, until next time, I'll see you down at the barn.